arrive there. But anyway, the pilots briefed their cabin crew, and after that they had to wait in the crew room for the aircraft, which was about 40 minutes late returning from the incoming flight. Once it had finally arrived, the crew walked out to it and saw that it had already been hooked up to the fuel truck and the refueling had started. And as they were walking out to the aircraft, the pilots decided that the first officer was going to be pilot flying for the first leg. Then, as they got closer to their destination, the captain would take over to do the landing, since that was a requirement according to the airport brief. Now, before he started the walk around, the captain looked through the technical logbook, which was more or less completely clean. There was only some very small malfunctions noted. He left the logbook in the cockpit and then walked outside as the first officer started setting the cockpit up for the departure. The cabin crew quickly completed their pre-flight inspections and started to board the 55 passengers who were scheduled for the flight. And once the captain got back into the cockpit, the load sheet had arrived showing a calculated takeoff weight of around 68 tons. The pilots completed their briefings and takeoff calculations, and at time 22:20 the aircraft started pushing back from its gate. The taxi out was completely standard, so at time 22:37, flydubai flight 981 took off from Dubai and climbed up to their cruising level of flight level 360, which is about 36,000 feet. The flight then proceeded completely normally towards northeast and towards their destination. Now, one peculiarity with the Boeing 737-800s at flydubai, which is different from the 800s that I normally fly, is that these ones were all fitted with head-up displays, or HUDs, on the captain's side. These are prisms that are folded down into the field of view of the pilot, and on that prism all of the relevant information from the primary flight display is then projected. This means that the captain will be able to see all that he needs while still seeing the outside conditions as well, which is a great help, especially in low visibility, since there won't be any need to transfer the gaze from the cockpit instruments inside to the outside. Now, this might come to play a part in what's about to happen, and I will explain all of that after this. While I was working on the script for this video, I came across several news articles about this story who were geo-restricted to the Middle East, meaning that I just couldn't access them. But that's when I fired up today's sponsor, NordVPN, who could change my virtual location to almost anywhere in the world at a click of a button. With their help, I could unlock a lot more information for my research, which is how I normally use NordVPN. But you can also use them to access your favorite shows when you're out traveling, use Wi-Fi hotspots in a safe way, or just browse the web anonymously and super fast. Lately, Nord have also built in powerful cybersecurity tools to help you block intrusive ads, check for web trackers, and even scan files for malware before you download them, meaning that they're now so much more than just a normal VPN. If you want to try this out for yourself, then use the link in the description below, which is nordvpn.com/pilot. This will give you 4 free months when you sign up for a 2-year deal, and you don't really risk anything since Nord always have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Thank you, Nord. Now back to the video. As far as we can tell, the cruise part of this flight continued without any real incident. We don't know what was said in the cockpit because the cockpit voice recorder only saved the last 2 hours of audio, but we do know that the captain's HUD was, for some reason, folded up for about 20 minutes in the middle of the flight and then folded back out again. Now, the HUD was supposed to be in use all the time during flights, so it's hard to know why the captain did this, but maybe he just wanted to enjoy the view of the night sky uninterrupted. Who knows? In any case, it is likely that the captain completed his approach briefing well before they reached the top of the descent, because 1 hour before the descent started, the right autopilot was disengaged and replaced with the left one, which is a normal sign that the pilots are switching control, since the autopilot should always be engaged on the pilot flying side. At 01:40 in the morning, as the aircraft passed a reporting point called Lapto, the crew called up Rostov Control and relayed their flight level to them. At that point, they also asked the controller if he had any updated weather information from Rostov-on-Don, and a few minutes later, the controller came back with the following information. Information uniform from UTC time 21:30. Wind 250 degrees, 9 meters per second, gusting up to 15. Now, if you want to know that in knots, it's a little bit less than double, so 17 knots to 29 knots. Visibility is 5 kilometers in light showers of rain, scattered clouds at 390 meters, broken clouds at 900 meters, and overcast at 3000 meters. Temperature 6 degrees Celsius, dew point 3, and runway 22 in use, braking action good. He also added that there was a temporary wind of 250 degrees, 13 meters per second, gusting 18, and a visibility of 1,000 meters in showers of rain and mist. Now, this was not great weather, but pretty much in line with what the crew was expecting. The wind was quite strong, but only 30 degrees off the runway axis, meaning that the crosswind was not going to be that bad at all. So, all in all, it looked like it was going to be a challenging but landable approach. The aircraft was soon handed over to the next controller, who informed them that there was also a SIGMET in force, indicating that severe turbulence was to be expected from the surface up to 15,000 feet. And this was the first time that the pilots had ever heard about that. The crew asked the controller to confirm which area was most affected, and he responded that almost the whole area was included in the forecast, but that no other traffic had reported any turbulence so far. Turbulence can often be forecasted like this when there's big pressure changes over a short time span in a region, but it's not always correct. At time 0217, the crew requested descent, and the controller cleared them to initially descend to flight level 190. They did that, and when they started getting closer to the level, the first officer asked for further descent, which prompted them to be handed over to the Rostov approach controller. When they checked in there, they were told that there had also been reports of moderate wind shear from Rostov-on-Don airport. It's very likely that the crew, when they heard this, briefed thoroughly how to fly the wind shear escape maneuver. But of course, we cannot be sure since the cockpit voice recorder from this phase of flight was still overwritten. Anyway, those of you who have been following this channel for a while, you know what a wind shear is. But if this is the first time that you're here, well then, subscribe and I'll explain it to you. Go on. A wind shear is basically an abrupt shift in wind, either in intensity or direction, that typically happens either on final approach or right after departure, when the aircraft is most vulnerable to speed changes. Since the aircraft flies based on the surrounding air, a sudden change in wind can cause a very sudden change in lift, leading to the aircraft either climbing or descending very rapidly, which can obviously be really dangerous close to the ground. Now, because of that, there are several warning systems on board who are made to try and detect these wind shears and let us pilots know about them as soon as possible. The first one of those systems is called the Predictive Wind Shear Warning System, and it will use the aircraft's weather radar and any moisture that it can detect to try and see the wind shear and then give us an early warning. On the approach, if that system is activated, it will issue a
go around, wind shear ahead.
And to that, we pilots can choose to either execute a wind shear escape maneuver or a normal go around, depending on what we see fit. The second warning system is the Reactive Wind Shear Warning, which is coupled to the aircraft's Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, or EGPWS. It sounds like this.
Wind shear.
And if that warning is issued, the aircraft is inside of a wind shear and an escape maneuver must be flown. There are also a few other flight parameters that could indicate a wind shear even if no warnings are issued, and those are a sudden change of 15 knots indicated airspeed, remember that one, a 500 feet per minute change of vertical speed, 5 degrees change of pitch attitude, 1 dot sudden displacement on the glide slope, and finally, any unusual thrust level position for an extended period of time. These warnings and indications will become crucially important for this story, but it is also super important to understand what the pilots must do in case they find themselves in a wind shear. The danger is always that the wind shear could cause the aircraft to be pushed down into the ground or lose so much lift that it stalls and starts falling down, and therefore these threats must be mitigated. So the wind shear escape maneuver includes the following items that must be done. The pilot flying must immediately disconnect the autopilot, push either toga switch and then aggressively apply maximum thrust and disconnect the auto throttle. Then simultaneously roll to wings level and pitch up to 15 degrees initially. After that, the speed brake must be lowered, and then the pilot flying must follow the flight director guidance, which will be in a special wind shear escape logic after the toga buttons have been pushed. The pilot monitoring must verify that maximum thrust has been set and then check that all of the other items have been correctly done before continuing to help the pilot flying by calling out any speed or altitude tendencies, as well as when the wind shear warning is actually out. You might have noticed here that this maneuver doesn't include any changes in flap or gear configuration. And that's because that might aggravate the situation, and the extended gear could actually help absorb any shocks if the aircraft would be forced into the ground. It also doesn't include any ATC calls.